Hi folks, Chris Martin here. In anticipation of the World Diplomacy Championships at WeaselMoot, I'm putting together a few short videos with my take on some of the players, the scoring system, and what you can expect at a really large diplomacy tournament. Today, I want to talk about the scoring system at WeaselMoot. It's called Sum of Squares, and yes, there is a little math involved. But don't worry, I'm going to break it down for you so you understand what your general goals should be. And we'll look at some real-world examples of games that were played at other World Diplomacy Championships and talk a little bit about how that might have broken down if the game had had a different scoring system. Then we'll take a look at what you might want to be doing at various points across your games to maximize your tournament score. Let's get started. Sum of Squares is a divide and conquer system. And obviously, if you can get all 18 centers, that should be your goal. That should be your goal every time you sit down to play diplomacy. But often, all too often, we find that that's not possible. Under this scoring system, what you want to do then is get as many dots as you can and get as much distance between you and the other players as you can, while the other players have an even number of supply centers distributed amongst them. That sounds a little complicated. Let's break it down with an example. On the home page of the Windy City Weasels, they have a couple of examples set up, so let's start by looking at those. In our first example, you see Austria has 12 centers, England is eliminated, France has 3, Germany 6, Italy 9, Russia eliminated, and Turkey at 4 centers at the end of the game. So, you square the amount of supply centers you had at the end of the game. Right? Easy enough. 144, 9, 36, 81, and 16. Then what you do is you give that number a percentage of points based on all of the points that were earned over the course of the game. So that every game ends up with a total of 100 points earned. So in this case, Austria gets 50.35, just more than half of the points. And if you look at the whole numbers, that makes sort of sense. Okay, there were 286 points scored, and 144 doubled would be 288. So he got just a little bit more than half of all the points scored. There you are. So France gets 3 points, Germany gets 12, Italy 28, Turkey gets 5. That's one example. And they contrast that with the example immediately below it. So you scroll down the page and you see the second example, in which Austria, again, has 12 centers. But his opponents all have either 4 or 3 centers. So that means when the total of their supply centers is squared, it's a much lower number. So when you add them all up, the sum of the squares is lower, 226 points. 144 points is 63% of 226 points. And as you go on down the list, you see that although the total of points is still 100, the score for Austria is much higher. So let's go back to 2002, the World Diplomacy Championships that were held in Australia. So in this example, we have Austria with 1 center, England with 15, France with 4, Germany and Italy eliminated, Russia with 14 centers, and Turkey with 0 centers. So looks like a stalemate line kind of situation, probably. Now, under the scoring system, we see that Andrew Goff had 15 centers and he got 17 points. Russia, Chad, had 14 centers and 16 points, with Eddie and Tony and Sean and Mark all getting some points, and David Norman, for some reason, getting no points at all. Let's take a look at how that would be under Sum of Squares. So when you look at it under Sum of Squares, there's a small but important difference. And what you need to remember here is that most scoring systems are designed to break ties amongst players who have similar results. So you recall that the delta in score was exactly 1 point under the Australian scoring system. Here, 51.37 is about 7 points more than 44.749. And that's a big difference when it comes to making a decision. Should I take this draw with the exact same center count? Or can I go ahead and allow this game to end with him being 1 center ahead of me? Is that really going to make that big of a difference at the end of the day? It just might. Let's take a look at another real-world example. So here's a board that was played in 2014 in Chapel Hill, and you might know something about this board if you've read the Grantland article, board game of the Alpha Nerds, or listened to the piece as it was projected on This American Life. So in this game, we ended up in a 6-way draw, which under Dixie-Con scoring is a really kind of mediocre result. If you look down at the score, we have Austria with 5 centers, England with 8, France eliminated, Germany with 9, Italy with 1, Russia with 5, and Turkey with 6. And you look at those scores and they're all pretty similar. Toby Harris, who had 9 centers, had 111 points. I, who had 1 center, ended up with almost 80 points. That seems like it's pretty close. What does that do under a sum of squares scoring system? When you look at it under sum of squares, a couple of things really start to stand out. You look at Toby's score now, and he has 34 points, whereas I, who just had 1 point, 1 dot left at the end of the game, I'm left with less than 1 point. Well, that's a much larger difference. England, who was 1 dot behind him, remember, is at 27 points, and that's about, in this case, almost 8 full points of difference. So that's not a great result for sum of squares, but you see how under a draw-based system, you want to get down to a smaller draw. Under sum of squares, it doesn't really matter if you have a lot of people in the draw or not. In fact, having a lot of people in the draw can be really good for you. Let's look at one more example. So last year in Milan, we take a look at this board that has Dave Miletsky and Nicolas Sahuguet on it. And Austria, 1 center, England eliminated, Dave and France at 10 centers, Germany at 9, Italy at 1, Marcello at 6, and Nicolas at 7. So under this scoring system here, you see that Dave comes away with a solid board top. He has 144 points, and you compare that to the next person with 9 centers at 105 points. That's a pretty good differential. And then Nicolas, who's 3 centers behind, has 71 points. Half as many points as Dave. Well, what happens if you had the same system under sum of squares? Same result, rather. Well, you look at it now and you see that, okay, Dave Miletsky had 37% of the points on the board, but Germany had 30%, and that delta of 7 is a lot less than it was before. And then you look down at Turkey, he has 18%. Well, that's not as good as it was before. So this is a really different scoring system. So you're going to get a very different result. And what I want to do now is just kind of talk a little bit about the tactics of this. And this is getting a little long, so I don't want to go too much longer. But let's talk some hypotheticals. Most diplomacy games have a beginning game, a middle game, and an end game. And in the beginning game, people are getting the neutral supply centers, they're figuring out the alliance structures, and then at some point over a couple of game years, somebody gets eliminated. One set of alliances sort of wins their battleground and starts to go across the stalemate lines to the other, and that's the beginning, usually, of the mid-game. Well, when you're at that point in a tournament game like this, you need to assess your position and see what should your goals be. Can you be the power that tops the board? Are you the largest power in the winning alliance, or are you the largest power on the other side of the board from the winning alliance? Can you work with the other players on the other side of the stalemate line to kill the people on your side, get more dots, and be like the 10 center power with a couple of 6 and 7 center powers? Because if you can do that, that's awesome. Or are you one of those players who can't get into that position? And if you can't get into that position, what do you do? And what I want to suggest that you do is you try and prevent anyone else from getting into that position. It could be your really good ally that you've worked with through the entire beginning game. If you see that they're about to get 3 dots because they're winning in their theater, let's say you're France, and England is just rolling through Scandinavia and is about to eat northern Germany and Russia, and you're still stuck kind of battling through the middle. You haven't gotten Munich, you haven't gotten Tunis, but you've had a good alliance, you've got the neutrals, you've been working well together. It doesn't matter how good that relationship is. If you want to win the World Championships, you can't allow that to happen. You've got to get some of those dots for yourself, and you probably want to drag them back to a point where they're no longer growing as fast as you are. That allows the game to churn and progress in a different fashion. It allows the alliances on the other side of the board to maybe mix it up a little bit. And this is some advanced play here, but you want to make sure that you have the best chance of coming out on top. And if you can't be that person, you want to make sure that the person who is on top is as close to you as possible. Now, in some situations, you can't do anything about it. You're Turkey. England is crushing through Scandinavia, eating, Germany and Russia alive. Well, you can't do anything about that with the pieces on the board, but you can negotiate about it. And often in those kinds of situations, a player will come to you and say, hey, look, I'm topping this board. It's pretty clear. I've got it under control. France is off in the Mediterranean. They haven't gotten any units on my borders. What I want to do is I want to put you in second place. I want to give you the next most dots. So just work with me here. Help me finish off Russia. Let's go ahead and kill Austria, right? Keep Italy, holding France down, and we'll take the draw, and you'll get 8 or 9, and I'll have 12 or 13, and it'll be a great result. That's fantastic. That's fine. That might be the best result you can get, but it is also one of the surest ways that you can cough up a solo. Because when you stab the person who is holding back that player from getting those dots, you better make sure that you and the other players can prevent him from getting to 18 dots from there. That is one of the classic ways of, in a scoring system like this, getting across the stalemate line, getting the force in place where you can make the 18 centers happen, is promise somebody second place. So, not for nothing, it's a fine tactic to use if you find yourself in that leading position, because the thing about Sum of Squares is there's exactly 100 points for every board. And the most points you're going to get for a really monster result is going to be in the 70 to 75 range. And that's like you got to 17 centers and were stopped at the stalemate line by 4 or 5 other players. Beyond that, it's 100 points for a solo. And that's the result that you want to get. Well, that's my take. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got something to add, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I'm Chris Martin, and I look forward to seeing you at the World Diplomacy Championships at WeaselMoot in Chicago.